Is the latest J.R.R. Tolkien book worth your time and money? Hey there, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 317. In this episode, I'm going to take a close look at The Fall of Númenor, the latest Middle-earth book. What's in it, and is it worth your time and money? Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air five to our patrons. Get those hands up there, patrons. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Very nice. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Scotchy Bobo, and Eru27. Become a patron by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. Right now, you can get 2 months free when you make an annual pledge, and you'll also get 25% off of everything at truemythspress.com during this holiday season. So, a big deal you want to take advantage of. Remember, your financial support helps the Tolkien Road to keep on evering on, and it lands you some cool perks along the way. So, really, you just got to head over to patreon.com/TolkienRoad to learn more. YouTube, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. All right, so the Fall of Númenor. Of Númenor, Elrond spoke, its glory and its fall, and the return of the kings of men to Middle-earth out of the deeps of the sea, borne upon the wings of storm. So this is a part of a quote on the book's very first page. And it's actually, this quote is lifted from Book 2 of The Lord of the Rings, from the Council of Elrond. And I think this is a great quote to frame what this book is all about, because at the end of the day, this is about compiling all of the different writings of the Second Age into one volume for Tolkien fans. It's like a definitive account of the Second Age, right? The catch is that it's using previously published writings from J.R.R. Tolkien and his son Christopher. So there's nothing new per se in this book. For that reason, the initial reaction to the news of the book was mixed. The big question seems to be, is The Fall of Númenor worth your time and money if you've already read most of these writings, if you've already seen most of these writings, if you can get them in other volumes already? And so that's what I'm going to be dealing with. So what's in it? Let's check out the table of contents. So the first thing to note is that the table of contents is actually arranged according to the tale of years from Appendix B of The Lord of the Rings. So more on that in a minute. We'll come back to the, how they use the tale of years in this book to organize everything. One thing I want to point out from the beginning is that there are 11 new pieces of color artwork depicting Second Age events here. They are the Fall of Númenor, the host of the Valar descend into Angband, looking west from Andúnier, Aldarion departs Númenor, the building of Barad-dûr, the forging of the rings, Galadriel leads the elves through Moria, the temple of Sauron, Ar-Pharazôn assails Valinor, Gil-galad crosses the Misty Mountains, and the last alliance of men and elves. These are really nice pieces of work, right? They are, they're worthwhile new pieces, and it's nice that they depict these images from the Second Age, which is, really a period of time that I would say in, in kind of the more popular Tolkien artwork, it's pretty underrepresented, right? You got a lot from the First Age, a lot from the end of the Third Age, but a lot less depicting things from the Second Age. I'd love to see a whole book of like artwork licensed, kind of licensed artwork to be, published of just different events from the Second Age. I think that would be really cool. But these illustrations by Alan Lee are very, very nice, very nice. So this book pulls from, in terms of the writings, this book pulls from The Lord of the Rings, A Calibaith, of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, Unfinished Tales, The History of Middle-earth, The Nature of Middle-earth, and The Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. So The Nature of Middle-earth, of course, just came out last year, and so it's great that we have the writings that pertain to subjects from the Second Age present in this volume, because The Nature of Middle-earth, it's a really great volume, but it's kind of like just it's different topics. There's a lot of different topics kind of mixed into one thing. So it's nice to have those right here. And we'll come back to that because it's really cool how they kind of lay them out. So there's, we're pulling from all kinds of different sources. Again, all previously published writings, but but they're all compiled here into on the subject of the Second Age and of Númenor. The introduction. So let's talk about the introduction. It's kind of noted as the saga of a dark age, right? So, and this is, Brian Sibley, who's the editor, is giving Tolkien's own words, right? And calling the Second Age a dark age. This introduction gives Sibley's reasons for compiling the book and explains the origins and development of the Númenorian myth. And for those who count themselves C.S. Lewis fans, this is a fun chapter. For in it, Sibley explains how Lewis's friendship with Tolkien helped inspire the myth in its original version. Of course, this is, if you kind of know the background of the story of Númenor, this isn't really necessarily something new, but it isn't something that's super well known, I would say, right? That C.S. Lewis played a not insignificant role in Tolkien developing the myth of Númenor in its original form. It's kind of interesting to think about the idea that we might not have, any like Númenor. We might not have this show, The Rings of Power in the Third Age, if it weren't for C.S. Lewis. Now, depending on your opinion of the show, you might be like, well, I could have done without the show, so no thanks to Lewis for that. But the point is that the Númenorian myth, which is very cool in and of itself, it can be kind of go back to, you can kind of find its roots in Tolkien and Lewis's friendship. The next section, before the Second Age, quotes from long portions of Tolkien's Waldman letter to explain how the elder days of Middle-earth lead directly into the events of the Second Age. And one thing I want to note is that Sibley, it's not like he just puts things that Tolkien wrote in there and that's all you get. Sibley does do his own kind of commentary in a similar way to what Christopher did in Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle-earth. Now, I will say, I feel like one frustration I've always had with Unfinished Tales and the History of Middle-earth is that Christopher, I feel like, had a way of writing that wasn't always very accessible. It was very sort of elliptical, kind of the style that you would expect from a lot of like Oxford non, like super well educated, like kind of talking around the issues. Sibley's prose here is a little bit more direct. It's a little more to the point, which is really nice, I find. As mentioned before, the main text of the book is organized chapter-wise according to the tale of years found in Appendix B of The Lord of the Rings. For example, on page 7, we find the year Second Age 32, titled The Edain Reach Númenor. This chapter contains explanatory info from Sibley, followed by extracts from Akallabeth and the History of Middle-earth regarding the founding of Númenor. Additionally, the beginning of the reign of each monarch of Middle-earth is identified in the appropriate chapter, beginning here with Elros Tar Miniatur. And alongside, in kind of this same section, we get these long extracts regarding the geography and natural life of Númenor that come from the nature of Middle-earth. So again, it's kind of nice because you've got right here in front of you, you can kind of read, okay, this is what's happening in the year 32, and then it's like, oh, and here's what Tolkien said about this. Oh, and here's what Tolkien said about this. And this is what Númenor was like. I mean, I've glanced over a lot of those passages from the nature of Middle-earth, and have said to myself, I need to go back and read this at some point, and maybe even do a video on them. But it's really cool to have them right there. And I think to myself, like, if I were pretty new to this story, if I were just coming to the Second Age stories, looking for something to read right after Lord of the Rings, or maybe right after the Silmarillion, it'd be really nice to be able to go to this and be like, oh, okay, I see how this, I understand the story of Númenor much better now. I can see all of these different parts brought together, and I see how the story of Númenor actually plays out over this whole time period. And each chapter is generously endnoted to provide further context and the original sources for the various passages. And that's really nice. So you can actually go and see where these different passages came from that Sibley pulls. As I read through this, I actually find it pretty great. It seems Sibley is delivering on the vision of providing a one-stop source for all things Second Age. Appendix A is a brief chronicle of the Third Age of Middle-earth and contains a long passage from Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. If you've read the Silmarillion all the way through, then you've read both Akallabeth and Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. So these aren't necessarily going to be unfamiliar to you, but again, there's something to having them all in one place, able to read, even sit down and just read this from start to finish and get that full picture of the Fall of Númenor. Yeah, it would be great if Tolkien had ever written just the whole story itself, right? Just written it out in like a long passage and given us all of this detail. We all wish that, we'd had like the story of the Second Age, like we have the Lord of the Rings, just 1,000-page book, right? That would be amazing. You need to do like 3,000 pages, right? Tolkien probably would have done it that way, but unfortunately, we never got that. So, in my opinion, this is like this next best thing. And then Appendix B contains the Númenorian chapters from the Lost Road, Tolkien's original non-Middle-earth version of the Númenorian myth. This is actually, the Lost Road is actually the story that Tolkien, it was a non-Middle-earth story that Tolkien wrote in the late 30s. And this was the story that was inspired by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien kind of had this deal that they were really unhappy with a lot of the speculative fiction of the time. And so C.S. Lewis was, Tolkien said, C.S. Lewis, you're going to write the science fiction story, the space travel story. And then Lewis was like, okay, Tolkien, you're going to write the time travel story. C.S. Lewis actually kind of followed through, got his published, and then we got the space trilogy out of that, right? So Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, That Hideous Strength, those books all come from that sort of deal that Tolkien and Lewis had. Of course, Tolkien struggled a lot more to be productive in the sense of getting things actually published in his lifetime, but we do have some chapters from The Lost Road. And The Lost Road, even though it started outside of Númenor, it was eventually kind of adapted, or it started outside of Middle-earth. It was eventually adapted into Middle-earth as he was writing Lord of the Rings and became the Númenorian legend. So there's actually some chapters from The Lost Road that date to the late 30s, predate Lord of the Rings, that are included here that talk about Númenor. And it actually contains like Elendil, right? So Elendil is one of the main characters of those chapters. So that's really interesting, and that's really cool to have those here, because if you were looking for those, they're kind of buried in Volume 5 of the History of Middle Earth. And sometimes it can be like challenging to even know where to find these things and what they actually are. And now that you have them here, a lot more people are going to be aware that, like, oh, the Lost Road is actually, it actually relates to the story of Númenor in this way. So that's really cool. I'm very glad those are included here. So that's what's in the book. Is there anything missing? Well, not much. The only thing that I could really find, that the major thing that I would have loved to have seen maybe as another appendix, is the Notion Club papers. The Notion Club papers are almost like attempt 2 at doing the Númenorian myth, in the way he did it with, he attempted to do it with the Lost Road, and then after he wrote the Notion Club papers, he kind of gave up, and just I'll just make this part of Middle Earth. The Notion Club papers came out, or were written in the mid 40s. And it's kind of like he was trying to put the Númenorian myth. It's hard to explain how this works with the Númenorian myth and the Lost Road, and then the Notion Club papers. You kind of have to spend some time to wrap your head around what he was thinking. Basically, his idea was, I want to not create. He wasn't trying to create a time travel story like we might think of, like Back to the Future or something like that, right? I'm going to hop in the time machine and go back in time. His was more like, sort of like an intellectual time travel. So in the sense of, I'm getting these kind of premonitions from times past, and I'm like paying attention to them, and somehow I'm going to wind up going back into this ancient history, right? So with the Notion Club papers, it was the idea that he had this kind of like fictionalized version of the Inklings, and they were talking about these like papers they had found, or these stories they had found about this ancient lost civilization known as Númenor. So anyway, the Notion Club papers aren't included here, unfortunately. You can find them in, I believe, Volume 9 of the History of Middle-earth. That would have been cool to include, but for whatever reason, they're not included here. Also, it would have been great to have the long-lost essay by Tolkien. If they ever decide to make a 5-season-long TV show about the Second Age, here's how they should do it. Yeah, I'm kidding. That doesn't really exist. But anyway, I just thought that would be cool if they had thrown that in there, if it just happened to exist. So, bottom line, is it worth your time and money? Well, Before I got my copy, I was a little iffy on this. I heard the news about it coming out, and I was a little like, okay, it's not going to contain any new writings, nothing newly published. And that was a little disappointing. We got the Nature of Middle Earth last year, which was really exciting, and so it was like, well, maybe we'll find, maybe there'll be some stuff in here that's, that's brand new. Unfortunately, there's not, and maybe we're getting to a point where there's really not a whole lot of Middle Earth writings from Tolkien that are just unpublished at this point. But so I was a little bit like, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm gonna grab this. But after spending some time with it, I have to say that I really like it. I really enjoy it, and I'm glad they did this. First of all, it's really nice to have all these writings on the second age in one volume. And second of all, I find a lot of value in Sibley's work of organization and his commentary, specifically in the way it brings an overarching narrative structure and paints a more complete picture of the mind of Tolkien concerning the Númenorian legend and the creation of the Rings of Power. I think this book is going to be really valuable, especially to those Tolkien fans who want to learn more about the Second Age after reading The Lord of the Rings or after watching The Rings of Power. As for me, I've read a majority of the writings compiled in this book, but I find it extremely helpful to have them all in one place. So yeah, it doesn't have any previously unpublished Tolkien writings, but it does a great service to a majority of Tolkien fans by making the Second Age more understandable and approachable. So my verdict is that for most Tolkien fans, this is a very worthwhile book. So, going to publish this video right in time for Black Friday. So this is you have the green light for me to go ahead and pick up your copy of the Fall of Númenor if you haven't already. Quick word about the editor, Brian Sibley. I think he did really great work here. He's a noted writer and broadcaster, best known in Tolkien circles for his work on the BBC's epic 1981 radio serialization of The Lord of the Rings, as well as books about the maps of Middle-earth and the making of The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit film trilogies. In 2022, he was the recipient of the Tolkien Society's Outstanding Contribution Award. Quite frankly, I really do like love this idea of maybe going kind of mining the works of Tolkien for different subject matter. The thing about the history of Middle Earth, unfinished tales, they're great, but they have a much more academic tone and bent to them, and for that reason, they can be very inaccessible. As a Tolkien fan, you remember that moment when you're like, I finished Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. There's 12 more volumes, right, of writings like with cool names like Sauron Defeated and the War of the Ring, right? And then you go and open these things up and you're like, what is this? I don't understand, right? It can be challenging. So I really like the idea of maybe like kind of I'm actually a fan of the idea of maybe repackaging some of these things to make them more accessible to the less academic like me, more sort of average layman reader, right? That just wants to read interesting things that Tolkien wrote about Middle Earth, right? And maybe compiling them about subject matter. So maybe that's Brian Sibley that can continue to do that work. But anyway, I think this is a really cool idea, and really appreciate the work that Brian Sibley put into this, and I think it's worthwhile. Everybody should go pick up a copy. All right. Well, hey, if you picked up a copy, what do you think? You like the Fall of Númenor? Do you think it's worthwhile? Do you think I'm wrong? Let's talk about it in the comments below, folks. All right. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy the Tolkien Road, leave us a rating and review. Subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. And if you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. Hey, drop us a line. You can correspond with us in a number of ways. Check out the show notes to learn more, and we'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. All right. Thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, Jacob Lockham, John H., Scotchy Bobo, Eru27, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T., Redhawk, Shannon S., Brian O., Emilio P., Zeke F., James A., James L., Chris L., Chuck F., Asya V., Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C., David of Pints with Jack, Jonathan D., Eric B., Johanna T., Mike M., Robert H., Paul D., Julia, Werty, Matthew W., JoeBagelMan, Chris K., Jacob S., Richard K., Matt R., Garret P., John W., and Eugene D., as well as those celebrating their Patreon anniversary in November of 2022, Michael L. and Matthew F. Thank you all so much. Thanks to our patrons for your support. We really appreciate you guys. And that's all for this episode. Talk at you next time. Bye bye, everybody.